Sure.
With the number. Okay.
Yep.
When? Yeah.
And
A while ago.
5-6 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It says 75 on the calendar, so I'm just trying to figure out where the miscommunication, where the
You're not far off,
miscommunication
actually. Yeah. She said to me, just make sure you're not over 200. Yeah. Okay.
because somewhere there was.
Miscommunication? I think we'll be okay. So far we're good. Thank you. Yep.
If need be, there's a phone right there. You dial 122 or 123.
Okay.
That'll get you to the reference desk.
Awesome.
And then you can let them know they'll call him on the radio. It's just that I'm leaving at 7.
No worries.
So.
Go home. Thank you. Liz, 2 minutes.
We're about 1 minute. 1 minute from starting. 1 minute.
See in there. That's us live. If you don't ever see the word live,
Oh yeah, the red.
if you don't see that, let me know.
Okay.
It should be okay. But just every once in a while,
I like the job. Let you know if we go offline.
And Bruce, I think you should put your Model T in here. Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome, everyone. My name is Robert Schwartz, and I'm the crazy man who started this whole entire group. I'd like to give a special thank you to Harper Fields Library for once again hosting us and allowing us to use the facility. Everyone should know, but between both groups on Facebook, the Bald Eagles of Centerport and Eagles and Eaglets of Long Island, we have almost 11,000 members. It's a lot of Bald Eagle love. I hope to organize more truly special events sometime in the future, which will include an up-and-close rescue bald eagle, other relevant events to raise awareness and help educate the public regarding our bald eagles and their environment. You're broadcasting live tonight on YouTube. Hello, everybody. In order to allow those who wanted to attend but could not to see the event live. The community of people that put so much time into capturing the story of the bald eagles is a story within the story, and I feel it's equally important story that should be told along with the success of our eagles. I touched on this last time, but I feel it worthy to be touched on again. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to recommend to everyone a really good book. It's called DDT Wars. DDT Wars is an untold story of a decade-long scientific, legal, strategic campaign in the for the national ban of the insecticide DDT in 1972. The widespread misinformation, disinformation, pathology, the DDT issues are correct in this book. DDT contamination has become worldwide, concentrating up food chains, causing birds to lay thin-shelled eggs that broke in the nests. Populations of many of these species of predatory and fish-eating birds collapsed, including the American bald eagle, the osprey, peregrine falcon, and the brown pelican. The numbers recovered spectacularly in the decades following the ban. During the campaign, DDT and 5 other insecticides were also found to cause cancer in laboratory tests, which led to bans in these 6 pesticides, international treaty in 2001. This campaign produced lasting changes in the American pesticide policies. The legal precedents broke down the court standing barrier, forming the basis and the development of the environmental laws as we know today. This case history represents the greatest environment victories of recent decades. DDT is still controversial because it has been deceptively injected into the climate wars. This campaign was led by an Environmental Defense Fund, the EDF, founded in 1967 by 10 citizens, most of them scientists, volunteers, without special political connections or financial resources. Their strategy was to take the environmental problems to court. There were many setbacks along the way in this exciting and entertaining story. The group was often kicked out of court, but a few determined citizens made a large difference in the environmental protection and public health. Authors Charles Worcester was one of the leaders of the campaign the first 6 years in EDF history as described as it struggled to survive. Now EDF is one of the world's greatest environmental advocacy organizations defending our climate, ecosystems, oceans, and public. I want to tell a story from the bridge. Centerport. This was told by Christine Carrier. I don't have her permission to say this story, but
You have my permission.
I'm going to do it anyway. Quote, today I met a wonderful woman, Aileen Rogers, on the bridge. I asked her name and showed her my pictures that I took of Mama Eagle. That's when she told me her former husband, Edward Lee Rogers, would be happy to see them. I inquired about him, and she told me that her husband worked in the Environmental Defense Fund in the late 60s and was the general counsel lawyer who stopped the use of DDT from being sprayed in marshes of Long Island in 1972. I told her that she had to know how much we all appreciated what he did, and that I would let everyone know in the group all that he did for the eagles and other wildlife. I told her that because of his actions and the actions of many others today, we are both watching eagles soar across Long Island. She was so thrilled. I hugged her and I told her about the group. I told her I was going to post her picture and the story. I looked up his name and found several articles about the major contributions to the environmental causes, and it was an honor to meet her and talk to her about her husband at the bridge. Aileen is supposed to be here. Is Aileen here? She's not. She was going to try to come. But I want to give a special thanks to her for her support. The eagles and the topics are especially important to me because I'm a beekeeper, and we face the same problems with bees, honeybees, as the eagles did in the 70s with thin shells syndrome. So this is probably why I got involved so much. At this point in time, I'm going to introduce Wildlife Station Master Kevin Jennings, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He's going to give a presentation and question and answer session. And then afterwards, I have some terrific new news that I think you'd like to hear. So with all that, Mr. Jennings.
All right, thanks, Rob, for having me. I am not wildlife station master. I did do that at the Envirocon for Long Island, but generally, I am a wildlife biologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I am the regional biologist here on Long Island, so dealing with Nassau and Suffolk County, which is Region 1. And I am in the diversity section, so I'm not a bald eagle expert. I wasn't involved with the bald eagle recovery that New York was involved with back in the day. I wasn't around. But I am involved with many of the species on Long Island that are either listed as threatened or endangered, or other species that we have particular concern about. So with that, there are probably plenty of people in this room who know a lot more maybe about eagles than I do. I'll try to give you some information about. So when Robbie asked me to talk, I figured, well, I can't really do a talk on the eagles of Centerport because everyone in the room is going to know way more about the eagles of Centerport than I do. So I have to branch out. So I guess I made this too early because I said bald eagles on Long Island, and then I figured that's probably really going to be a really short talk because I gave an update at the Long Island Natural History Conference, and that was like 5 minutes because there's really not that much to talk about. So I backed up a little bit and thought, okay, let's think a little bit about, maybe try to give you guys some information, some you might already know, maybe some you don't know, but just about just the general biology, the life history of bald eagles, a little bit about the history of bald eagles within New York State in general, and the recovery that took place with the DEC and other agencies, and then talk about the bald eagles on Long Island as well. So try to mix it all in. And for folks who like to read and want to follow up a little bit more on the information I'll talk about, a lot of it comes from the conservation plan for bald eagles in New York State, which was finalized only a few years ago. I want to say 2015 maybe, but it's been in the works for many years. So that's available on our website, on DEC's website. So if you were to Google DEC and the bald eagle conservation plan, you can find it. So I don't want to talk about the description of bald eagles because I think everyone here knows what a bald eagle looks like and what how to identify one if you saw one. But generally, the bald eagle, the iconic image of the bald eagle that we all see, those features show up in the eagle when the eagle's 5 years old. So that eagles, juvenile eagles, the ones you've seen over in Centerport, they're dark brown with varying degrees of white streaking on their body, and then they over the years they continue to get less and less white streaking until they reach that 5-year-old stage and look like the adult bald eagles that we all know and see over in Centerport. So in general, bald eagles will eat almost anything. So they're mainly fish eaters, but they'll take waterfowl, they'll take gulls, they'll take small mammals, and probably what they get a lot of on Long Island is carrion. So they're eating dead animals that they find, and I'm sure with roadkill, there's no shortage in supply of dead animals on Long Island for them to eat. So, and one other thing about bald eagles, and it's sort of a little bit of a story, but a couple of years ago, my in-laws are from Maine, and they have a little house on a lake up in the middle of Maine. And one morning, I'm sitting at the table, looking out the window, or not even looking out the window. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a splash in the lake, and I look out, and there's something in the lake, and it looks like it's doing the butterfly. And so I look out, and it's swimming. It's like swimming. It's big, and it's trying to get out of the water. And finally, it flies out of the water. And it's this bald eagle. And you'll notice the terrible pictures in the presentation are mine. The good pictures, I just stole from people, so people let me borrow them. But all the terrible pictures are mine. So it was this bald eagle, and presumably the bald eagle was diving in to catch the fish, did not do a very good job, and came out of the water really wet with no fish. So bald eagles, they do steal food from other raptors, other bald eagles, probably other ospreys that are really good at catching fish. It makes me think maybe this is one of the reasons why, Ben Franklin, when he wanted the turkey, not the bald eagle, maybe he was thinking, oh, these bald eagles that steal food from other animals and whatnot, and like the turkey rather than the bald eagle. They can catch fish and they do, but that is just one part of the way that you get food.
They like eels too.
Yeah. So, bald eagles, this map, which is on the Cornell University, the lab ornithologist website, it's, in general, it shows you bald eagles prefer or breeding in the northern latitudes, Canada and Alaska. The orange is the breeding territory, the purple is areas where they're found year-round, and blue is generally non-breeding, so where they're spending the winters. But this map was made in 2000, and obviously you can't really see it, but New York is almost all blue, so they're presuming that they're non-breeding, and that's not true, which we'll talk about a little later. But in general, this map, their breeding range, or not just breeding range, but breeding sites where they occupy, has definitely expanded even since 2000. So migration, the bald eagles, and especially the bald eagles around here, they're not really migrating too much. When you think about a bald eagle or any species and their drive to migrate, there's certain things that force animals to migrate. It costs a lot of energy to migrate. So if you're migrating, you better have a really good reason for it. So if you could find food, you stick around. If you can find shelter, you stick around. So things like that. So if you're able to find shelter, find food, the bald eagles don't really need to travel all that much. And you'll see bald eagles on Long Island throughout the year. So the further south you get, the more likely it is bald eagles aren't leaving. The older the bald eagle gets, the more likely it's probably not leaving because it wants to defend its territory. So juvenile bald eagles will likely travel much further, wandering around, finding food, and then ultimately trying to find new territory. So they like to be moving around. They sort of wander around. So not quite accurate, that map, but it sort of gives you a picture of what's going on in terms of where bald eagles are located. So this is another picture I sort of stole from the lab ornithology website. It's really at first glance and from where you are, it's probably impossible to understand if you haven't already seen one like this. But in general, it gives you the breakdown of what's happening throughout the year with the bald eagle. And because they occupy such varying latitudes while they're breeding, it's not quite the same. So this is sort of an average for it. I think it's taken from Alaska. So if you think of each of those black bars representing the outer bar migration, the two inner bars, the middle bars, the eggs when egg laying and the young are present, and then the inside when they're molting. If you sort of turn the dial a little and made it happen a little earlier in the year, just because we're further south and we're warmer, so it's going to occur a little earlier. This is sort of the sequence of events. So building the nest, right there, they come back to their nest every year. So they're always sort of building it up and making it bigger and stronger and working on it. So they always are working on nests, but a new nest maybe could take up to 3 months to make. So they're building their nests for about 1 to 3 months. In New York, mid-February is sort of the earliest you'll see egg laying. So that would mean sometime in November, you might end up seeing nest building. and which for the Centerport nest is, I think, right around the time when people started seeing sticks being brought to that tree there, or at least when I found out about sticks being brought to the tree. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So November, the birds are around, building their nest for a couple months, laying eggs in mid-February, probably March more likely, and then they're sitting on eggs for 35 days, so another month. So that puts you into April, maybe the end of April. And then, the chicks in the nest, they're hanging around that nest, not able to fly, depending on their parents for about 8 to 14 weeks, depending. It fluctuates a lot, depending where in the country they are, and probably a lot of things like, food availability and whatnot. But in general, that it's, you're talking about another 2, maybe even, close to 4 months where they're in the nest. So if it's, April, May, June, July, you might start seeing what juvenile birds start leaving the nest, which I think for the Centerport nest was right around the time, right? When the birds started leaving the nest around July probably. And then they hang around with their parents and the other young birds for a while because they're just getting used to it. They're learning about, finding their own food and whatnot. So they still sort of associate that with the nest loosely, and it starts breaking up. And eventually, I think it was maybe end of August I might have been out there, and the birds weren't really associated with the nest anymore. So eventually, when the breeding season's over, they have a loose association with the nest, but they're moving and they're finding food and finding shelter, maybe roosting in other locations. So that's sort of the sequence of events throughout the year for the bald eagle. So in the winter, like I said, the bald eagles on Long Island are likely to hang around here because we do have open water throughout most of the year, almost every year. But in other parts of the state, we have these sort of congregations of wintering areas that we've located where, there's, basically the current is strong enough in these water bodies to keep the water moving, to keep open water flowing, and therefore their food source is available. So you get a big stretch in the Hudson River, the St. Lawrence River up around number 2, Lake Champlain, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and the Allegheny River. So they're congregating wintertime. They get together in groups. They'll roost together in trees. You'll see you can see large numbers. But obviously, we don't see large numbers like that of roosting adult bald eagles in the wintertime here. We just don't have that many. But during the wintertime, especially at the northern latitudes, they'll find open water to congregate and find shelter from the wind and the snow that's going on while they're trying to find food. So to sort of now jump into, well, what was the history of bald eagles in New York, right? So, when the DEC created the Endangered Species Unit back in the 70s, and they started working on the restoration plan for bald eagles, Pete and I, who was one of the biologists there, who was really involved in the restoration work, he sort of put a lot of this information together. So in general, the historic records are, note that bald eagles were relatively common throughout New York. Now, they were probably nesting throughout New York. There's no nest count, so we don't know how many nesting pairs there were in sort of the 1800s, but we know from historic records that they were generally considered common in New York State. Now, for Long Island, if you look at the map, this map shows what Pete and I came up with as in the 70s when doing the restoration work. What you can verify as bald eagle nesting locations from 1800s up until the time they were doing the restoration, coming up with the restoration plan, which was the 70s. So, and you see there's the one dot on Long Island. So bald eagles, they weren't necessarily all that common on Long Island. There was no real historic record of nesting on Long Island other than, now that dot, I tried to get some clarification of that dot, and there's some conflicting information. There was some additional information that I got. That dot, what we know about from Bull's Birds of New York, which was published in the 70s, talks about bald eagles being actively breeding on Gardner's Island up until the 30s. Now, that's not Gardner's Island. Obviously, Gardner's Island is off the forks there. So that's not Gardner's Island. So what's going on there? So it made me think, well, what is that dot, right? And so I asked around, and there was a record. Pete Noddy found a record, or there was a note in the file talking about a record of bald eagle nesting 4 miles west of Riverhead. Now, I guess it's a rough map, so that could be right. Where 4 miles west of Riverhead? I don't know. But there is a record from 1899. The New York State Museum collected a specimen dated 1899, adult male, at Artist Lake in Middle Island. And so, presumably that could be referencing a pair or nesting bald eagles around Artist Lake, around the turn of the 20th century. So maybe late going into early 1900s. There presumably might have been bald eagles nesting around Artist Lake. There are other records a little later, I think 1905, that put a bald eagle around the Middle Island area as well. So, but there's scattered. Basically, there's scattered records. A lot of more juvenile bird records. Christmas bird counts, like early 1900s, out at Orient, having juvenile bald eagles, and then scattered again juvenile, mostly juvenile records on Long Island. But in general, bald eagles. There's not much of a record of bald eagles nesting on Long Island. So we wouldn't, during the recovery, we wouldn't necessarily presume that there would be bald eagles showing up on Long Island. But early 1900s, bald eagle populations within the state, and presumably all along the East Coast, where development was kicking up and whatnot, started to decline. People shooting bald eagles, logging, resulting in loss of habitat, and then just general disturbance around nests that caused birds to abandon, and so the population took a hit, starting in the early 1900s. And so by the 60s, right, they're nearly gone from the state of New York. In 1970, there was one pair of bald eagles, breeding bald eagles. Well, I'll call them breeding. They didn't produce young after a while. But in 1970, there's one pair of bald eagles at the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge up north of one of the Finger Lakes. I think it's Cayuga Lake. But north of one of the Finger Lakes, there's a wildlife refuge up there, and there was a nest there, and they were breeding for a number of years, not producing any young. They were laying eggs, and those eggs weren't hatching, like Rob talked about. Like I'm sure a lot of you know, he liked the thinning of the eggshells, and those eggs would break before they would hatch. So they were breeding, but not producing any young. So we were down to one. The U.S. as a whole was down to about 450 breeding pairs, and so restoration plans started. The the Endangered Species Act was passed, and all sorts of things. DEC was banned, and things started rolling. So by 1988, New York reached its interim goal of 10 nesting territories. So the goal was to just get up to 10 nesting territories, which they sort of accomplished in about 10 years or so. And so I'm zooming through the history, but we'll go back and talk a little more. But in 1995, the federal government downlisted them on the endangered species list from endangered to threatened. And by 1998, New York reached its, because there were three sort of goals. They were hoping we wanted to get to 10, then we would stop the the active recovery efforts, then get to 20, and then ultimately get to 40. We thought, we'd feel good at 40, and then we could take them off our list. So in 1998, New York got to 40 nesting territories, and this was the sort of criteria, the threshold for which we thought at that point we can take them off the endangered species list altogether. So we're 20 years later, and they're still listed in New York State. In 2007, they were removed from the federal endangered species list, so they're no longer federally listed as an endangered species. There's a separate law, so a separate federal law, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, that still offers additional protections other than some of the other federal laws like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So they do have additional protections, but they're no longer listed as endangered or threatened under federal Endangered Species Act. They are still listed as threatened species in New York State. So how did we went through the brief history, but how did the recovery happen? Well, obviously, like Rob said, DET played a big part. The national ban in 1972 was the reason why bald eagles were able to recover and other species were able to recover. Once this was removed from the environment and it started, you weren't getting the eggshell thinning and breeding pairs were able to reproduce and the species could continue to extinct. So, but it took some active measures, right? We only had one breeding pair in New York State in 1970. So 1972 comes around, they ban DET, but we have one breeding pair within New York State. So DEC, as part of their recovery efforts, decided to, they thought they would, this hadn't been done before with eagles, but they thought, what if we got, we have a pair of bald eagles in New York State that are attending to a nest, right? They're trying to reproduce, it's not working. Maybe we can bring in some eaglets, put them in the nest, and this pair might foster these birds and allow them to fledge and then sort of find their own nesting territories. And so DEC got eaglets, so between 1976 and 1988, they were able to get 8 eaglets from Wisconsin, bring them back, and over the years, I think it might have been 2 the first year and maybe 1 or 2 over the years, not obviously every year. Over those 12 years, but would put the eaglets in the nest and hope that the adults would foster. And so that was one, this sort of the beginning of the efforts, but that was not, they need to do a little bit more. It wasn't just enough to have the one pair fostering juveniles, and so they needed another strategy as well, which I'm sure some of you, maybe all of you have heard of hacking, which is basically just you take eaglets that were hatched somewhere else, you put them in a tower. So with eagles, they nest really high up in the canopy, so they want the towers to be really high up. So it would sort of mimic the natural setting. You put them up there. They don't have parents, but presumably if you provide them with food over that course of time, that's what the parents are doing for the most part. They are sheltering them, they're brooding them, so they're keeping them warm as well. But if the idea was if you can care for them with little human interference, so trying to do it without, hanging out with them or making it noticeable that people are involved with the bringing the food, maybe they will, grow up and be able to flex. So the DEC took efforts to build these hacking towers and bring in eaglets and to raise them up. So that process started with, we gotta get eaglets, right? And so I guess Wisconsin was no longer an option, for whatever reason, I don't know. I wasn't around, sorry. But Alaska, because it had a pretty good population still, Alaska was willing to work with DEC, other Fish and Wildlife Service, and Cornell, to collect and transport eaglets from those nests and bring them back to New York. And so, so those eaglets were then placed in the hacking tower and fed and whatnot, and were able to fledge on their own. So there were 4 hacking sites in New York, sort of spread out over the course of 13 years. They brought in 198 eaglets. And so, this was what sort of got the population in New York going. So these eaglets would fledge, and some of them didn't make it, so not all of the eaglets survived, but a good majority of them did, and they were able to establish new territories and find mates and breed, and that was the start of these birds that were brought in were sort of the start of the bald eagle population that we currently have in New York State, along with other bald eagles will travel, juveniles will move to find new breeding territories. So, the mixing from other states and the efforts that other states undertook. There were other states. We have a slide. This slide shows sort of where our fledges, the fledges from the hacking efforts, ended up. So you can see all throughout New England and even over to Michigan, the fledges were able to, those juveniles spread out and made it to other parts of the Northeast there. So each of the birds were banded, so you can track these birds and know exactly where they were ending up and how well they found mates and how well they were reproducing. And so New York wasn't alone. So New York sort of spearheaded this and got things going, and other states sort of replicated the hacking efforts. So you can see this is in the conservation plan, but it just shows the locations of other states that implemented hacking programs. So fast forwarding all that work that happened in the DEC Endangered Species Unit and Fish and Wildlife Service and Cornell and a lot of people that were involved in that. It sounds simple. It sounds, you just feed some birds some fish for a few months and then they just go on a fly and that's all it is. But I would imagine climbing those towers and getting the food and just the effort to coordinate getting birds from Alaska. It was a tremendous effort that took place with a lot of people involved. So there are a handful of people that are the sort of prominent people who were involved in the process, but there were a lot of people involved with making this making the bald eagle recovery a success. But this is sort of just a map showing the eagle nest as of 2016. So you can see, I'm going to click back, but the dots on the map from the Pete Nye's effort in the 70s to show the historic stuff, what was happening for the previous 170 years. There's this explosion. And this is probably in 2016, I think 250 nests maybe in New York, and where our goal was, get 40 breeding pairs in New York. So there are a lot of birds nesting in New York by 2016. And you can sort of, you see the nests, the breeding pairs on Long Island. And if you sort of take a look at the map, you see these, straight line right up there, Hudson River, and sort of these congregations around the large water bodies. And so this is really hard to read, but the first date there on the left on the lower the x-axis there is 1966. So we're talking about, it's not 0, it's 1. Remember, right? But the productivity is 0 at this point. They're not producing any offspring at this time, and so it remained that way for a long time. Right? We talk about bald eagles, and it takes them 5 years before they reach adulthood. So they're not breeding for 5 years. So it takes some time. It takes some time for them to for the population to build up. But as you see, once the population builds up, and you get some years and years of offspring on the landscape, it explodes, and you go from 1983, where it's sort of the start, where you start getting a bump up to over the course of maybe 20 years, you get this exponential growth, and it really takes off in New York State. And sort of you can see the blue line is the total young per year, which sort of also was just tracking up along with them. So if each pair is producing one, the goal was 1 young per year in the recovery plan. They lay up to 3 eggs, usually 2. So 1 young per year was considered a success from the nest. So as they're breeding, this population sort of explodes in New York. So jump down to Long Island. So while this explosion is happening in New York, remember they thought 40 was a success, and we're gonna take them off the list when we get to 40, and then we're getting up to 250, probably over 300. That's a lot more than historically was happening in New York State. So birds are, competing for territories. They're moving. Juveniles are spreading out further distances likely, and they're taking up territories in areas where maybe they historically weren't breeding. So in 2006, they might have been showing up. Adults might have been showing up and breeding earlier than that. But in 2006, on a Christmas bird count on Gardiner's Island, there was a sighting of a pair of bald eagles. And so for a number of years, so there was some presumed breeding. So there were bald eagles, a pair of them on Gardiner's Island. So they presumed that they were breeding. And so for a number of years, that pair of bald eagles was showing up on Gardiner's Island. It was the only one that we knew about. And then in 2013, I think the next nest that showed up was the one on Chubb's Island. I'm not 100% sure, but we started seeing another nest. And then every year after that, sort of, there was one or maybe two nests adding. And so for the last 5 years or so, nests have been popping up. We see, I'm sure you guys are aware that, juvenile bald eagles on Long Island. If you go on eBird, you'll see juvenile bald eagle sightings in a lot of places on Long Island. You'll even see, we'll talk a little bit later about where else they might be on Long Island, but you see records on eBird of people citing adult bald eagles in a number of locations on multiple occasions. So they could be in other places. But by 2018, so up until this year, we have 8 nesting territories on Long Island. Another one of my bad pictures. So, the Centerport bald eagles. More bad pictures. So in July of last year, I was getting some emails, or DEC was getting some emails. I spoke with some people, and one person in particular was telling me that they were seeing adult bald eagles on Bird Island in Northport Harbor. And so, I don't know if that person's in the room, but maybe not. But there were other records and other people talking about bald eagles in this general vicinity. So we thought, oh, there's probably a nest there. So maybe we'll find it. We don't really do active searching for nests. It's really difficult to find nests, especially when you think about New York State and the other areas where they are breeding. You can't just go out and walk and try to expect to find a nest. So most of the nest searches take place using a helicopter, and you're flying over. You want to get like 100 feet over the trees, and you're flying in the wintertime, and you're trying to look for, basically you're looking for a nest, but you're looking for birds that sort of swoop out of the nest while you're flying over. So we don't really do that on Long Island because we just never had the history. So in other parts of the state, they do that. So looking for the nest, that wasn't really a priority. We figured there are a lot of birders on Long Island. If a bird shows up, they're going to let us know. So this is summer of 2017. We hear about bald eagles, adult bald eagles in the Centerport area. In the very beginning of December 2017, someone contacted us, I think someone in the neighborhood, with some really good pictures. And I didn't use his pictures because I don't have permission to use his pictures. So I didn't use his pictures, I used mine today. And he had some really good pictures of adult bald eagles with nest material going to the nest on the pond. Tung Pond, Centerport Pond, however you the chalet pond. So in December we get pictures of nest building. So nest building, probably there's breeding activity going on. That's exactly a positive sign of breeding activity in Centerport. So in April, and I'm sure most people in this room probably knew way before I did, I found out that there, in fact, were 2 chicks in the nest. And then over the course of the months, we weren't really following up on them again. We don't, in New York State, you saw that map before, there's 40 was our goal. We don't look at every single nest in New York State anymore. So, and they're not listed by the federal government anymore, so they're not asking for numbers or very specific data to be collected. So we don't really check every nest that close. We do want to see if they're active, the nests are active each year. We do want to sort of get a sense of the fledging at the site for productivity. But other than that, we're not sitting on nests. We're not sending people out to monitor nests to see, when they're hatching or how things are going. We just want to know the answers.
This group could tell you everything you wanted to know
Yeah,
about.
So I'm sure I would.
What, when, how they eat, what they do every day. We have a dedicated group of people that love these eagles.
I have some really good information. And it's funny because you get, you read literature and you, because bald eagles are found, again, across such a gradient of latitudes, their behaviors are different in different areas. And they do things for longer, or they do things for shorter, or they don't do things quite the same, or they don't eat the sort of same species in different areas. So sometimes, the sort of very local information, you get a new sense of something different that, you didn't see in the literature. So that type of information is really, it's nice to have. But so.
We can add to your information. It's between 5 and 7 eaglets in Cold Spring Harbor right now.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right, guys?
So, but, so juvenile bald eagles?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
500 cameras.
Yeah. Just look for the long lenses. You'll see them all.
Yeah. So,
We think so. We're not exactly.
so yeah.
If it was migrating.
So the current status on Long Island, right? I said there are 8 nesting territories that we know of. Not all of them were active in 2018. Presumably 5 of them were. We don't really get good information from Gardner's Island. They're very private, so no one really goes out and monitors. They don't really share information about what's going on in the island. So, but over the years, since at least 2006, we've gotten a sense from the people at Gardner's Island that it's active, they're successful, things are doing well. So until we hear otherwise, we presume that Gardner's Island is active and successful. The nests that weren't active this past year, so like I said, there's 8 nesting territories, only 5 were active this year. Last year was the first year for 2 of them, so they were likely new pair, new pairs with their first nest attempt. It's not unheard of for a first nest attempt to fail. They were new nests. They were relatively small nests, like the Centerport nest. These nests get huge, so that Centerport nest is relatively small. Over the years, when they come back, it'll get a lot bigger, presumably, as long as the tree can hold it. So that's another thing. Some of them fall. The trees are too weak. The trees fall down, which has happened at the nest in the tree at the William Floyd Estate, the National Park Service property in Shirley. The tree fell down, not this year, but the year before, and they rebuilt. So that's an active nest. The nest at Wartime National Wildlife Refuge, that's another active nest. So the two, and so when you sort of look at, these sort of East End, we'll call the stuff in Massac and Shirley East End or east of Long Island, you get left further away from developing. They're sort of more like other bald eagle nesting territories, right? They're relatively isolated. Bald eagles are, in the literature, sort of sensitive to disturbance, so they generally nest away from people. But as the population gets bigger, they're looking for territories and they're competing. So they sort of start taking up new territories. So 2017, you get nesting in western Nassau, and they were unsuccessful. As far as I know, they were unsuccessful, and did not come back this year. So they could be building nests in other. So bald eagles, sometimes they'll build more than one nest. So they could have another nest in another location within that territory that they're defending. So that wouldn't be unheard of. So that pair, could have nested. We just don't know about it. They weren't at the nest that they were in the previous year. And another nest is competing with ospreys. When it first showed up a few years ago, 3 years ago, I think, it took over an osprey nest. The ospreys, they show up later than bald eagles, so they also come back to the same nest every year. So they were a little upset that their nest was taken, and they were able to, successfully root out the bald eagles, and they did that again this year. So again, maybe that pair is gonna find another nest location and maybe build another nest in that territory. We just don't know yet. So we'll keep an eye on that and get some information about where that bird is nesting. But Long Island, what we know right now, 8 nesting territories, 5 pretty much active. Those other 3, we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. We'll keep an eye. We'll go back to them and take a look. But my hope is to this year maybe get some of that. So like I was talking about, the rest of the state does. Some of these nests are really far apart, so they so they have to monitor. The only way to monitor them is to go by helicopter. You're not just driving and hiking through the woods, it just takes all day. So it's not efficient to do that. So they are flying. So the rest of the state does fly to check bald eagle nests. And I'm hoping to get some time this year to do a flight over some of these areas where we suspect there might be nests. Just based on records, people seeing adult bald eagles. Finding juvenile bald eagles, that's good. But like I said, it takes 5 years for them to breed. And so it's it's a bald eagle, a juvenile bald eagles in the area wouldn't be considered a sign of probable breeding. So, but a pair of bald eagles or adult bald eagle carrying a stick or something like that, that would be a sign of probable breeding, and we want to check that area out. And some of these areas that I circled in red are areas that, like I said, adult bald eagles at the right time of year, either with nest material, either observing breeding behavior, or just repeated observations of adult bald eagles. So like Hempstead Lake State Park, for years there's been many observations of adult bald eagles there, and you would assume it's a heavily birded location. It's a lot of traffic. You would think that if there was a nest there, someone would see it, right? I don't know where it is, or if there is one in that area, if they're just moving around and using that for feeding and then nesting somewhere else at some other body of water. I don't know. So it would be interesting to sort of check out these areas. And so I sort of highlighted them in the Hempstead Lake area. Like I said, Cold Spring Harbor area, there was some information that I got from someone in Laurel Hollow and the Cove Neck. So that's sort of right in that same area. Stony Brook Harbor, I got information about adult bald eagles in that area. Maybe at Artist Lake, it's someone in my office who lives over in that sort of general area, saw this past year an adult bald eagle at Artist Lake. And another person that is a big birder saw adult bald eagle at Artist Lake, I think this past year. So that might be another spot. And then you sort of that iconic, not iconic, but the Pine Barrens core area, all that public land sort of in that area around Calverton and Riches and that area over there. There's a lot of forested area near Iconic Bay, Flanders Bay, where there's plenty of foraging habitat. There's plenty of tall canopy trees for them to build nests in. So that presumably that would be another area we'd want to check out. Last year, somebody might have seen I think it was an article in one of the East Hampton news, not East Hampton, but the East End newspapers talking about observation of breeding behavior on Kalis Pond in the Mecox Bay area. So again, presumably out in that area, it would be nice to check that spot out as well during the winter time with help. Like I said, I'm the regional biologist in Region 1, which is Nassau and Suffolk County. There is I don't know how successful they've been over the years, but Staten Island does have a bald eagle nest, and there have been observations at Flushing Meadows Park and Prospect Park of bald eagles using those areas as well. So, there could potentially be nests at some point at that location. You wouldn't think based on literature, just based on the amount of disturbance at those locations, but you never know this with our bald eagles. So, what is the future hold for bald eagles? Over the years, we're going to find more and more bald eagle nests on Long Island. How many is going to be our sort of cap? I don't know. They're going to compete with ospreys for space. They're going to compete with people for space. Some areas may not be good. You know, surprisingly, the Centerport bald eagles, they successfully produced 2 fledges, really close to human disturbance. Might not thought they would be successful. The other 2 that we had close to human disturbance didn't do so well in the first year. So we don't really know right now. So I do expect us to see more and more bald eagles over the coming years and probably find more nests and locations, but not necessarily knowing right now what the sort of cap is for Long Island. If we thought 40 was a good number for the state, and now we're at like around 300 or just over 300, who knows? That we could be in for a lot more needs. But they're going to be around more. People get to enjoy them. It's something that we don't get to see every day. Being sort of a more developed area, you don't get to experience some of these things that most people associate with open space and isolation. And it's nice to see. It's nice to see something like that happening here for the people all around. So, but with that comes increase in disturbance. So, more people, more disturbance, more likely that there could be negative impacts to birds while they're breeding. Now, it's highly likely, considering that the federal government delisted the bald eagles from the Endangered Species Act at this point over 10 years ago, and that we have flew by our recovery objective of 40 nesting territories in New York State, that the bald eagle will likely at some point come off the New York State endangered species list. So that is one, it's a good thing, right? So the idea of putting them on the endangered species list is to protect them and to recover them and get them off the list. A species that stays on the list in perpetuity is not really a success. So this is a good thing. They'll still have, like I said, federal protections from the Bald Eagle and Eagle Act, but in all likelihood, during the next revision of the Endangered Species Act, there's a good chance, just based on hitting our goals and sort of the progress that has been made, that they will come on the list. So, this is my contact information, my email, my phone number.
Nice picture.
Feel free to, yes, and guess who took that? You? Not me, because I told you all that. So that was not me. This, though, it was someone in our office, one of our technicians, her dad took this picture in 2015 in West Babylon, on Montauk Highway near the Kmart over there, which, where they would be probably not necessary. I can't remember exactly. I think it was in the late fall, so who knows where this bird might have been setting up shop. But if you look on the right leg, it kind of looks like it has a band on it. And I don't know if you probably can't get any more information out of that band by zooming in. I don't know. I know he had a good camera, but I don't think he had that good a camera to read the numbers on it. But so that area, it's possible. There's not really, in that particular area, there's not too much habitat that you'd expect, sort of large forested areas with canopy trees. But, you never know. It might be over there. So here's my information. I know another part of me being here was to answer some questions, clear some things up for people, just to be a point of contact if you did have any concerns or questions that you want to reach out to someone. I'm here. So there's my information. If you have questions, I'll take questions. Someone in the back had their hand up.
Yeah, you were talking about, you touched very lightly on increased interactions with ospreys. I know from watching osprey nests for years and photographing them, 2 of our nests have basically been abandoned when this pair has moved in. How large is the territory and how is this going to affect the osprey population in our area?
Yeah, so if you think about the sort of area that a bald eagle will defend, into their territory, I guess in general it's sort of like 1 to 2 square miles. So that's sort of based on the literature. all the bald eagles so far on Long Island sort of defy the expectations of what the literature says. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them nesting closer together or defending smaller territories. But, it will, they compete for very similar spots. Now, bald eagles aren't going to nest in a lot of the structures that we built for ospreys. Ospreys seem to love the structures we put up for them, and they do really well there. And the majority of their breeding now at this point takes place in nesting structures. So I wouldn't anticipate, and the population of ospreys is, again, they've been delisted in New York for a number of years, and their population is doing really well. So in terms of population level impacts, I wouldn't suspect that you would see any sort of significant decrease in osprey population. That locally you might see displacement of ospreys because of the bald eagle, but I can't imagine that that the population of ospreys would be negatively impacted by bald eagles coming in. Okay. Sure.
This spring, that pretty spraying over the wetlands of Long Island, would that affect the eagles in any way? The waters?
Yeah. So I'm not a pesticide expert or anything, so I don't want to sort of speculate as to what effects methamphetamine would have on bald eagles. Now and I don't want to sort of, I know a little bit about methamphetamine, I know, and how it acts and how it sort of controls insects. But I wouldn't necessarily, it's gone through testing, and as far as I know, as long as it's applied according to the label, it doesn't result in the sort of effects that we saw from DDT, where those compounds didn't necessarily go through the same review process as they currently do now.
Thank you.
I don't want to miss, so I think you were maybe next. I'll get to everybody.
I have just a quick question.
If you could stand up, it would be easier. Thank you.
The ones that are banded, are you still tracking them? Or did what are you doing with the banded ones at this point? And are you banding any more in the future?
So on Long Island, we haven't banded any. In New York State, in the beginning, they were banding every bird. In 2010, I think was really the last time. It was probably the last time we stopped. We banded birds. It's probably I'll retract that. Any major efforts to ban bald eagles or eagles at the nest, which is we did do in the past, we don't do it anymore. There are specific instances or specific projects where we are tracking specific pairs of birds, with satellite trackers, or catching them, putting them on backpack transmitters, and tracking their movements for specific projects. But an overall banning effort for bald eagles, we don't do that anymore. So, so this bird, if it is a ban that we put on, bald eagles, they can live, 30, 35 years, probably more like 20 or so, 15, 20 years. But so this could be banned from a bird that we banded. It wasn't that long ago. We were still banning birds in New York. But like I said, because the population is doing so well now, there's no concerted effort to go to these nests and ban each and every bird that is born in New York. And so tracking-wise, the ones that abandon, there's really no good way to track them because we don't know we can't tell individual birds apart. So we couldn't, if I found another nest, maybe in that same area around the abandoned nest in like Kings Point or Great Neck or something, we could presume that it was the same pair because we're not seeing them again, but there's really no way to tell for sure, and we're not actively trying to track them. Yeah.
If you delist it in New York State, what protections will they lose?
Mostly it has to do with incidental actions that are incident. So tape. I don't know how many people have heard of the word tape before, but tape is sort of it's a regulatory word. It has a very specific definition. It relates to a whole array of activities or things that would result in disturbance to a bird. So harming, harassing, worrying. For listed species, it gets into adversely modifying habitat, interfering with essential behaviors. So that would be considered a take. If you were to, let's say, if there was a bald eagle, it's a listed species in New York, and it was nesting, and you did something that caused that bird to abandon the nest, that would be considered a take. It would be incidental to what you were doing. If you were doing, like, putting up a house next to the nest, the take is incidental to what you were trying to do. So it's not necessarily, you weren't trying to make it abandon the nest. But that action, even though it was incidental, is covered under them, with them being listed.
So-
If bald eagles are no longer listed under the New York State Environmental Conservation Law as a threatened or endangered species, they're no longer protected from that incidental take. So the take could be, if it was incidental and they weren't doing it on purpose, and they abandoned the nest, it's not, they don't need to get a permit for that activity, they don't have to, they wouldn't be a violation, so there would be no enforcement action. But they're still protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, they're still protected under New York State law as a protected wild bird. So you can't directly harm, harass, worry the species, but it's the incidental take that
Yeah,
will no
but
longer be
this
protected.
gets into the developers and stuff, because when they decide to build on an area and say, we're gonna cut down all these trees,
Yeah.
that's where the incidental
Right,
take
yes.
happens, and right now, that's a big protection.
Yeah.
That's a huge protection, right, because the development occurs, and we've got all these wooded areas that, people want to build more and more and more and more. And particularly the large developers, when they come in, they love delisting species, because then they don't have to go through any regulatory, they can just take down trees.
So in Centerport, where the nest is, obviously, we all know where that is. There's a lot there that the owner of that lot has been trying to build there forever. So I think a concern of the people here is that what happens if they do decide to build a commercial building on a commercial lot? It's his property. The nest happens to be on private property, but sort of overhangs the commercial property. Do we have, as a group of concerned people who want the eagles to stay here, any recourse or anything, or we just have to?
So there's a couple of things. So, like I said, if the species is no longer listed as threatened or endangered, they no longer have this incidental take protection. So, if it was incidental, they wouldn't need to get a permit for something that was potentially disturbing. And the idea is that species that are vulnerable, threatened and endangered, need that extra protection because every single nest sort of counts. So therefore, if they were, the population got to a sustainable level, which you can argue that the bald eagle population in New York State as a whole, New York State, we're not talking locally, so we're not talking, because, as Department of Environmental Conservation, we're looking at, a more holistic viewpoint. So we're looking at population level effects. So if we've determined that the population is sustainable and therefore, we don't need those extra protections. The State Environmental Quality Review Act, so on big projects, they have to go through a different process, and there's a process for which local municipalities have the ability to become, and I'm not an expert on State Environmental Quality Review Act, but it's a process for which you would produce an environmental impact statement. A big project, the developer would have to address all sorts of environmental concerns. And the lead agency, a local town or something like that, or even the state in some instances, would determine whether or not they were doing enough within their environmental impact statement to either avoid impacts to certain environmental impact or mitigate those environmental impacts. So in those instances, there may be some leeway for additional protections, but like I said, that sort of additional incidental take protection, if they were delisted, would no longer be.
But right now, they are listed in New York State.
Yes.
So if a large commercial property next to the Eagle Nest wanted to build
Yeah, they would have to get an incidental take permit. And the process to get an incidental take permit requires the applicant to avoid first. So you have to try to avoid any impacts first. That's first and foremost. We're not, it's not, oh, you want to do something, to jump straight to. You can do it, but, do this instead. So you have to try to avoid. Then you have to try to minimize impacts if you can avoid. And then at some point, if it warrants it, you get to mitigation, where you have to do something in addition to offset. And it's not just offsetting the impact. So if we quantify the take, which would be, let's say you quantify it and it's one abandoned bald eagle nest. So in some cases, it's a whole thought process. So you could play it out to many different ways. But whatever that take is that you quantify, the applicant would have to come up with a net conservation benefit. So it's not just enough to say we offset or we balance it out to zero, the negative versus the positive. There has to be a net benefit. So there has to be an additional benefit in order to get a take permit. So what that is, it differs on a case-by-case basis. And so I couldn't speak or say for sure what that would look like in actuality if there was a proposed development there, but it would still have to go through that process.
Is New York DEC doing anything to encourage governments and school districts and educate them from using rat poison that if the rat upon dying is eaten by an eagle will kill the eagle? I know I've had my own municipality to go from the old type rat poison to the kind that is not, that's eagle friendly, if you would.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, that some of the rodenticides that are used, rodenticides typically the ones that are used both commercially and, I'm not an expert on them, so I'll probably get something wrong, but in general, they're anticoagulants, so it causes the animal that eats the rodenticide to not be able to clot its blood, so it bleeds out, it basically hemorrhages and it dies. And that some of these newer rodenticides that they're using, they persist in the environment, so that rat that ate that rodenticide would then, not die right away, so not necessarily die in the house or the business that it was killed in. It would roam around and may go outside and die, and then something like an eagle, which eats dead things, picks up dead things, could presumably eat it, and then basically feel the effects of that rodenticide. So they could then hemorrhage or act differently or whatever, and it could result in that. So with that being said, what is the DEC doing? It's something that, we're aware of. It goes through all the pesticides that get registered as pesticides in New York. They go through a whole process of getting registered. And as long as applicants are using that pesticide per the label, it's legal, they can do it.
What my question was, is New York DEC doing anything to encourage the various governments and school districts to use the newer type of rat poison that does not kill it through the coagulation, but does coats the stomach so it can't absorb the water, and an eagle is not affected by that?
So as far as I know, there's no effort to do that. At the local level, like you were saying, that might be happening.
The public works said, okay.
Yeah. In some cases, that all it takes is sort of educating the public to the options. And I don't want to go too much into it, but there are, other than bald eagles, there are other raptors that exist. So owls will eat rodents that come up that have eaten pesticides, and we'll find them as well. So it was something in particular I was aware of, and it's something that I think would be a good education outreach to sort of for the DEC to make people aware of options. But as far as I know, there's no concerted effort to do that. Go ahead.
To add on to his, to help him with his question, school districts do have to follow DEC law and integrate pest management at the state level. So school districts do have to comply with what
not DEC though. The DEC, as he stated, is not telling you to do that. This is going beyond DEC. It's nothing illegal about using the old-fashioned rat poison. This is the new ecological rat poison that instead of killing through coagulation, it'll kill through coating the stomach, and the rodent cannot take in more water, moisture doesn't, and then he dies. But that will not kill a bird.
Districts have to follow integrated pest management, which tries to eliminate all pesticides and pesticides. They do have to.
Yeah, so I think what he's saying is that school districts follow, like I said, the integrated pest management approach means, you're using multiple options. You're not just jumping to pesticides. You're doing different things. You're, cleaning up your debris, not creating shelter for things that pests that you might have. So they have like districts, but businesses don't necessarily have to follow that. And so there's nothing illegal about using those pesticides that we talked about, but that doesn't mean there can't be an education component where you're saying there are other options and make people aware of the potential side effects of using and the sort of, what could happen if you use these, because there is evidence that we get, it does happen. Birds of prey eat animals that, they show up with these rodenticides in their system after being tested, finding them everywhere from the state. So yeah, it is something that DEC is aware of, and they have raised that issue. But if anyone's interested, I know there's a good paper from one of our wildlife pathologists that they wrote a couple of years ago about the raptors and rodenticide in New York City and stuff. So you might be able to find that on DEC's website.
I got 3 questions.
Oh, okay.
I might as well get it. The first one is as far as they were talking about commercial construction down at the Chalet Motor Lodge. I know in other states, any sort of construction near an eagle's nest is restricted as far as they can't do construction during the mating season or while the eagles are in the nest. Does that apply in New York State?
Yep, that would, if you went to, the New York Conservation Plan, or even the federal bald eagle management guidelines, you'll see there's a sort of table in there and it tells you, the guidelines. So if something like that were to happen in New York, like I said, they would be required to get an incidental take permit, and the conditions of those permits would be time of year restrictions.
And would you guys be involved to ensure that that in fact takes place, should construction ever happen down that place on that bad that they got there?
Yeah, so like I said, it's likely also, that pond is also a New York State regulated freshwater wetland, so if they're developing within 100 feet of the pond, they would need to get freshwater wetlands permits as well. So they would need to get town permits, and presumably the town, if the owner doesn't already know, which they do, because when we found out about the nest, I sent letters to all the property owners around the pond, or at least the ones that were affected by the location of the eagle nest, a letter just pointing out to them with a link to the guidelines, explaining about the intent to take process and sort of avoiding disturbance and all that. So I reached out to the homeowners around the nest, so they're aware of it. The process of getting permits, is sort of ingrained in local towns. Most people know they need town permits, and sometimes they don't necessarily know if there's nothing obvious that we need a DEC permit. But towns are pretty good about things, and that's sort of where it comes down to, the public comment period at planning board meetings, where people show up and say, hey, that there's a bald eagle nest here, and that bald eagle is a threatened species in New York State, and that it likely requires a take permit, and then the town says, oh, okay, I didn't know that. You have to go to DC to get a permit as well. So those are the kind of things that happen. But yes, we will be involved if something like that takes place.
Okay, question number 2. When we had the eagles in the nest when they first fled, they landed on the electric wires. And through the efforts of members of the group and through no support of our local officials, we were able to get several of the lines covered to protect the eagles from getting electrocuted. Now, there's several more lines at the location that is the same situation that we had in the spring. They could land on those wires. Now, to cover those wires, this is the time to do it. Now, calling, who's our congressman? Calling the town of Huntington, calling our, I don't want to mention his name because it will set you off. None of our elected, I'll put it this way, none of our elected officials got involved in solving this problem. It was up to members of the group that got this done.
Hey, Fred,
Now,
I'm going to interject for you. If you want that done, we have an avenue without the DEC to get that done.
The utility companies are usually
Yeah.
it
receptive
should
to
be
environmental
done
issues.
now.
Good. So what?
Based on nesting.
So what someone like you needs to do is to give the exact locations of your concern, and as a group, as 11,000 members, we send that to LIPA, and they'll do what they did the last time, which was within 24 hours, get to the location and cover the wires. It's doable. But I'm not so sure the DEC has a part to play in that part, unless we got pushback from them, which we wouldn't. I don't think that we would. So,
Yeah, it definitely is, Rob is exactly right. With a group like this and, 11,000 members speaking as one voice, you oftentimes get things done. And like I said, the utility company, PSEG, in terms of other environmental issues, osprey issues they deal with a lot of times. It does happen, birds do get electrocuted. I'm not an electrician, I don't know all the details, but obviously, just landing on a single line is not an issue for wildlife. It's when you have the multiple phases going by and they end up touching.
right, and they covered those phases for us. There was a lot of effort by a lot of the members here to make that happen. People got right up, and within 24 hours, they were covered. Which leads to the second part of this, which I'm hoping that you have, to stay on the same subject, is what's the DEC, what's their feeling and their feedback to putting live cameras up as other locations throughout the U.S. have as far as live? Are they willing to assist a group like us in getting that done? Is this a private matter? Is this something that we have to do ourselves, or do we get the state involved in getting that accomplished?
So, the state, just in terms of, it's not as simple as just slapping a camera and
Right.
saying, yeah, with my webcam. There's a lot that goes behind, hosting a website and everything like that, which the DEC just doesn't have the capacity to do.
But I do.
Nor,
I could provide everything
yeah.
except the permission.
And unfortunately, we don't really have, the DEC, the state doesn't have any, we don't have any additional pull to make someone do something on their private property that they don't want to do. It's not against the law. So just like hunting, the private property owners can allow hunting on their property, or they don't have to. They don't have to allow people on their property if they don't want to. Unfortunately, if they wanted to let people on and put up a webcam and it wasn't interfering with the behavior of the bird, then it's not considered a take, and therefore DEC wouldn't have to get involved. So it really is something to work out between a group such as this, or a group of people that can have the means to put something like that together and then make it happen and then get information. So that's really the route.
Sorry, Fred.
I have one last
Yes,
question.
third question. Yeah.
One of Rob's greatest desires,
Oh, no.
and it's also the desire of many members of the group, cleaning up the mill pond. All right? And Rob's been talking about getting private donations to members of the group. And as a last resort, I'm more than willing to throw in my share. My question is, can the DEC get involved to get that mill pond cleaned up for our birds? Because that's their primary feeding location for the juveniles, for the babies, and basically, that's where they eat. And there's all sorts of trash in there and garbage in there that should be cleaned up. And we'll do it privately if we have to. But I just think that there should be some governmental agency that governs that mill pond, particularly now that we have eagles there to clean it up. That's my question.
Yeah. So I don't know who, and the mill pond is obviously not the Centerport pond, it's the pond where the mill dam road goes to, right? That's what you're talking about. Yeah, the bridge, right. Okay. So I'm not I'm not as familiar as you guys are with all the locations in Centerport, so I want to clarify exactly what you're talking about. I don't know who owns the mill pond. I would assume it's the town of Huntington.
They own the
So-
bottom.
Yeah,
So
so
the
they,
town trustees, the town board, when they wear the trustee hat, owns the bottom line.
okay, yeah.
And they control that, and they control navigation.
So,
So the actual physical land around it as well is owned by somebody, presumably the town of Huntington, or are there homeowners that have property lines that go down to the pond edge? And that would depend on, you'd have to do a little bit of digging at the county clerk's office to look up, tax
so
records.
I'm willing to do all that work. I'm willing to step up, work with the town. Can we have a commitment from the DEC to help us? Let's just say the town said, you want to clean up the pond, clean up the pond. The groups decide everyone's going to throw a couple of dollars in together. We'll get the fire department or another company or something to go and clean up. Can the DEC assist us and say, listen, we have the backing of the DEC that is willing to work with us to get that pond in pristine condition or that area in pristine condition?
So, I don't know if you're not helpful, because, maybe sometimes we are helpful, but, and, personally, I would like to be helpful. I don't necessarily speak for the entire DEC, so,
Could you look
it's not
into it?
something- It's not something that we could, let's say, force the town to do.
Right.
Or force anybody to do. Whether or not we could be involved, I don't even know, in terms of monetarily, it's oftentimes difficult based on our funding and.
Well, we could do the funding is the easy part. We can get that done. The people support, we can get that done. I think we can get the town support, but we want everyone's support to make it happen. The only way it's going to happen is if everyone who cares about the area pitches in at some point, whether it's just support or whether it's funds or whether it's physical labor. That's possible, but if we knew we had the DEC behind us, I think that might go a little further in getting that done.
Yeah, I'm nobody, so at DEC.
Maybe we could
If the group wanted to reach out to people at the DEC and see if you could get buy-in.
Could you get us somebody who would be able to say, hey, I'll work with you, or no, you're on your own, or... Sure.
Eagle Scout project, something like that.
I looked into the Eagle Scouts, and the danger's too high to involve children. And they could walk the perimeter, and in fact they do. They have a cleanup day. There's one day a year set up to do that. But it's the pond itself. If you spend as much time as some of us do down there, you see the little red cups floating, the tires in the bottom, things of that nature.
Maybe there's something that they can do to arrange the room, maybe even some of their research or something to even fund something or find.
The support of them knowing, once again, there's numbers and there's power in numbers. Sure.
Out to the scouts, they could come up with something, and maybe even contact the
Absolutely.
or even where the local municipalities have cleaned up certain roads, things like that. Maybe there's something that a lot of the community could get involved in.
Okay. Well, look,
Can I
Yeah.
have a question about grants and,
we'll get to you, Laurie. I'll get to you.
Ross and Kevin, I've been involved in, with the Greater Huntington Council of Open Running Clubs. It's 22 organizations, yacht clubs and HOAs that surround all of the waters just in the Huntington Bay area. Is it possible, I know Ed Carr is head of waterways in Huntington. He's very proactive. He's been very instrumental in getting grants to better our waters, which he has done. Are there grants that would be available to the town of Huntington that would help them on a project like this?
so at least one grant I know of that's, I want to say it's a New York City grant that administers the grant, and it's for projects related to Long Island Sound, so if there's a connection to Long Island Sound, and I
There is.
would encourage someone to look up New York City grant, Long Island Sound I think it's Long Island Sound Studies Future Fund, maybe. Yeah. But if you look up the New York City grant, there's every year, and I haven't been involved in the review of those grants in a while, so I don't know the status of if they're doing it every year. But you might want to look in New York City grant to see if there's any funding available through that.
Waterways grant also, they're encouraging canoes and kayakers, especially in the North Shore in this area, to map out an area of where they could pull in. I know it was in Oyster Bay, and
We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, there was an area in Oyster Bay. They had it all mapped out, and I believe part of the South Shore also in Oyster Bay where canoeism was an initiative, I believe, it was a New York State initiative called Seaways or Blueways. It was about 4 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, it's definitely something as a group that, you could look into in terms of funding, because there are, at times, groups that small project funding sources that you might be able to tap into. And I think Long Island Sound, that huge fund there, that if it's still going, you might be able to go there. Yeah.
Just to address this issue about cleanup,
It is a new branch of the DEC, and it's generally under the jurisdiction of freshwater wetlands. Anything that's done within 300 feet of a wetlands needs a wetlands permit. So, and I was responsible for saving wetlands and mapping them. So it's a process, but it's a different leg of the DEC. And then once you start seeing phragmites and cattails, there's not that much you can do in terms of disturbance, even in the best efforts of cleaning up, because the ecosystem is already starting to form.
Yeah, generally cleaning up, so picking up garbage and stuff like that, doesn't require a permit from a wetlands permit. But any sort of, if you need to get machinery involved, or if you want to remove phragmites, that kind of thing, you're right, it does require a permit. But just in general, cleaning up, walking around the shoreline, even waiting a little bit to get some garbage out is not. And I'll just mention that, DEC is not as mighty as a lot of people think. We're not an army of people. Our office is, 4 wildlife biologists, wetlands office is so we're not, you guys as a group, you do way more at that pond cleaning up than DEC ever could. So I encourage you guys to go forward with that, and if that's something you're interested in. I think as a group, you could probably do a really good job at that spot.
Jill?
What if, are we able to pull together and just do a volunteer? Yeah. It seems like we're talking about something, trying to get you is not going to happen, obviously. And it's not going to happen with county officials, because we know how that went. We have 11,000 people between these two groups. Why can't we do a volunteer day? And whoever wants to come, comes, and whoever doesn't. And you bring your waders and be prepared to walk in the mud, which I've done. If you can grab a tire, pick it up, or whatever is in there, and pull it out. And there's stuff that we can see when the tide is low, and I know it's mucky, and I know you can get stuck. But even in terms of dropping a line of rope over the bridge with a little anchor thing on it, you can pull something up and get it out of there.
I would just encourage, and I think that's
Garbage,
you're right.
things that you can see.
And that's a great idea. I would just encourage to just remember who the property owner is, and if it's a town, just getting permission, the town's okay with you being on their property, because if something happened to someone on that property, the landowner, is liable. They want to make sure that people are covered. So I don't want to encourage you guys to just go out and do it without telling anybody, but so getting landowner permission is really important. Sometimes it's as easy as just asking the right person and then saying yes. So I think with a group this large, speaking as one voice, you might get people.
There's only 3 houses that are, I mean, it could be 10.
Yeah.
Knock on the door,
It is.
leave a letter in the mailbox or
I
something.
would just say, yeah, definitely be careful about trespassing on private property, even if it's something that looks like it's not private property. Oftentimes, lot lines go down to the water's edge. So even if it's not a backyard with a swing set, some private property owner might own the woods or the field or whatever that goes down to the pond. And trespassing on someone else's property is definitely not something you want to get involved in. So I would just do your homework.
All right, we're going to take one more question, and then we have a 10-minute final part of this. So, one more question?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because all the questions kind of revolve around, I can sort of hear the answers in people's heads. This is the area of grassroots everything. I mean, the state has to balance, the environmental groups, which were probably one of them, and then there's business groups, and there's environmental regulations. They can only enforce what the regulations are. So then you have to pass laws or keep laws on the books or add regulations. I was just at the state site, and they're getting comments now because they want to expand and clear up that tape. There's a whole 2 pages on it. I'm scrolling through it because it's unclear what it means to do that and what's the process. And my first question is, are there public hearings required? Right? Public. We, the group, can exert much more power as a grassroots group than going to government and saying, most of the time government's going to say, yeah, you want to do it, fine, you have the money. And that's really what it's about. It's about organizing and deciding what we want to do, and then just find out, if somebody said no, well, okay, let's find out why they said no. Let's see if we can fix that.
Well, it's people like you and us tonight that start the process.
Right.
So we have a way to communicate, open forums. If it's something that you can lend yourself to, and that goes for anybody here or in the group, stand up, be heard, say something in the group, get a hold of me. I'm more than willing. I'm able to do whatever you need me to do, and then we can take it further. Yeah. But I'm in agreement with really everybody here, Jill, Bruce, I mean...
I want to just clarify just one thing, and I want to get back in the weeds on tape and stuff like that. The sort of reinterpretation of tape is happening at the federal level. It's the way the federal government or the Department of Interior now is interpreting the definition of tape with how it relates to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and not necessarily how it relates to New York State Environmental Conservation Act. So some states don't have an environmental conservation law, and so their only protection against states is the federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the federal protections. That's not the case in New York State. The New York State has its own environmental conservation law, its own definition of tape. We enforce our own definition of tape. So a lot of the discussion about the reinterpretation of the definition of tape is happening at the federal level. There are, groups of state agencies that are involved in getting in that discussion as well, but it is a federal decision to change that interpretation, not state level. So state level, we still have our own tape.
I know Miss Carpenter, who recommended you, awesome. We called her and she took care of the issue for us essentially instantaneously, and it was awesome to see that we had support when we needed it. So DEC, I'm all for the DEC, whatever we could do to help the DEC and vice versa. So that's it. Thank you, Kevin, very much. That was awesome. So as
As part of the fundraising that we're going to start, I have a lot of mixed feelings about doing what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, because that's what I do. So far up until this moment, we haven't taken a penny from anyone for anything. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to take any money from anybody for any other reason. So we're going to start a small campaign, especially before the holidays, to raise a few dollars, and those few dollars are going to go to this. If the group decides it's a good idea, and if and only the group decides it's a good idea, you'll see it. This is a sign that I'd like to have to raise some money to put down in Herring Park that describes all the wildlife in the area, describes where the eagles can be seen. There are many people that come down for a walk down to the bridge and take their kids down, and they don't know where to look or what to see or what they could see. But this sign would give information about the area, maybe a little bit of the history, the photographers, some of the pictures they've taken, all up on that side. It's an informational sign. Instead of going for the gold the first time around, to take little steps, and this first little step, having an information sign down in Herring Park might be a solution. It's inexpensive, it's relatively straightforward to have done. I have inns in the town to have them okay it, to put it in. It's just a matter of whether the group wants to do something like that. And how do we raise a little bit of money? And legal growth. This is my wife Liz. She's wearing a brand new Centerport Baldwin's t-shirt. I've done all my research, and I've seeked a lot of different companies, and one of the photographers made a recommendation to a company that provides quality rather than quantity, but also at a very reasonable price for the product that we're getting. All high quality stuff, hats, t-shirts, hoodies, things of that nature. I'm going to put a poll up on the group. If the group wants me to, I will put a means and a way for you to purchase shirts, and 100% of that money will be put towards something like this. Will be put towards a photographer's stand that if you wanted to come down and have the best vantage point of taking pictures, or having students from the local high schools come down and be able to use a photographer's stand in a safe place. Or buy used equipment, leave it at the library, and the kids can come up and borrow it for the day and take it down to the photographer's landing to take pictures. Things of that nature. I mean, one of them, for instance, is we have a vet that comes down to the bridge. He started, after he found out there was a bald eagle that was there, and the first time he's been out of his house in 10 years, and now he comes regularly with his wife, gets wheeled down there, and sits there with binoculars looking for the bald eagle. So there are lots of good, really good community-based things that we can do because of the eagles. It's not for profit. We don't have a not-for-profit. If there's an attorney in the house that'd like to help us start a not-for-profit, I'm all ears. If you know someone who's willing to work with us to get a not-for-profit, things of that nature, we could do it that way. Otherwise, I'm willing kind of to accept the money in a bank account and show accounting for the things that we purchase, such as having a nice sign like that. I also wanted to talk about a new venture that we're taking on. This is going to help photographers tremendously. I'm going to bring up Stephanie, who volunteered to help the group find our way on something called Instagram. So Stephanie, if you could. She hates me for this.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. So yes, I volunteered to help Rob set up the Instagram account for Bald Eagles of Long Island. Just so you know where I'm coming from, I think Instagram is a great platform for photographers and animal enthusiasts, and anybody with an interest like you guys all have on this Facebook group. A
A few years back, I started with it, and I connected with photographers from all over the world. And they even offer you challenges in different groups that allow you to submit your work and possibly be featured for the day or the month. And I just think that's a great way to share your work. So many people take thousands of pictures, I'm sure, hundreds at least, of these eagles, and I think it's a great opportunity to share it in like a gallery format. If you're interested in it, we would love to feature your work, of course with your permission only, and that's about it. We made it general. Initially we wanted to do it about the Centerport Eagles, and after some thought and some talks, we decided that it's better to open it up to all the eagles on Long Island for all the reasons he just described, how the population has increased all over. And that being said, that's why we changed the name to it. So if you're on Instagram and you hashtag those two items, it gives me permission to feature them, and I would connect your Instagram handle to the photo that was featured for that day. Again, this is all volunteer, this is all for fun, it's just another way to outreach and give support.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please make your final selections and take them to the circulation desk to check out. Complete any photocopying and printing at this time. The library will be closing in 15 minutes at 9 p.m. Thank you.
Anyway, for that reason, that's why I volunteered to help. I think it'll be a fun way to share your work and get mutual outreach for the other organizations that are on Instagram as well in support of the Bald Eagles. So if you have any questions.
I would like to add one thing. By using this hashtag, it also connects you to other Instagram accounts or other people that support us as Instagram, the National Geographic, the National Eagle Foundation, things of that nature. If you want your pictures to be seen, this is a means and a way to accomplish that. So it's not just within the Centerport Eagles, but it could be an eagle that you saw on the South Shore or someplace else in Alaska. Someplace you want to feature your work. We now have a place to put all of your work up in one place to bring it back.
Absolutely. And I will never reveal the location. That is really an important thing for me. So it would just be listed as a region, North Shore, South Shore, East or West, and Long Island, if you had provided that information for me. So you don't have to ever worry about that. Any questions?
Once again, Mr. Jennings, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. I've said this before, but I want to say one more thing before you leave. I got a call yesterday from, last year I did a little bit of snooping around, and I asked the Vanderbilt Museum what they thought about putting on an exhibit of the Eagles in all its glory, especially the Centerport Eagles or the Eagle's Nest, as we know it. And they were very warm to it. So I think they've come around a little bit. I got a call yesterday, and after they saw how many people were involved in the group, now they're essentially begging us to do something. So ideas are, I don't know if anyone's seen Ozzy's videos or anybody else's videos, or the beautiful pictures that these people take. To see them on the planetarium ceiling in an event, to have them as portraits at the museum might be something special for the community. Raise awareness, raise a few dollars for the group in some form of capacity, but I think it's something that the group could strive for a worthy cause. Hats, you can see them. We can have them printed really any way. I don't want to go cheap with them, but they're inexpensive. I was able, like I said, I'm going to put a poll up on the group. If you decide that you want to be a part and purchase a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a hoodie, a jacket, pink, green, purple, I will make that available after the poll. Remember, it's my time. I'm going to be building the site in order to make that happen, and I'll be responsible for orders and things of that nature. So if the group sees fit that they are interested in owning a piece of history, like a shirt or a hat, then we'll go through with it. 100%. I don't want a penny. I don't want anything from anybody. I'm willing to pay. I already have an Eagle Cam up on my property right now. It's aimed at the nest. I can't see the nest because the leaves aren't fully off the trees yet. I'm crossing my fingers that there's one tree in particular, if it fell down, I wouldn't have a problem. Or the leaves suddenly we had a windstorm and everything went up. I was hoping the snow did it, but it didn't. I would love to be able to broadcast 20. I have a live B cam, some of you do or don't know. I'd love to do the same thing with the Eagle Cam, be able to see the nest without being invasive on my private property, looking at the nest. People want to know, are the eagles in the nest? Can we see the babies? Things of that nature. That's at my cost, 100%. There's not a penny taken from anybody to do any of this. This is more for the group, for the community. We also have one other thought, which is a GoFundMe. We could start a GoFundMe account, which we could put up a project that everyone had majority interest in having it accomplished, raise some money to get that done, such as the cleaning of the wetlands, improving the area somewhat, adding more garbage cans down there, more poop bags for the dogs, things of that nature. We're going to cost us to keep the area beautiful. And that's all I have to say about that. As Forrest Gump would say. Thanks for your time.
You know when you can't take pictures unless you have a habit.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 5 minutes. The library will be closing in 5 minutes.
See me in that car with my bad knees. That's for sure. Don't come out tomorrow. Yes. Introduce yourself.
Mine is my choice.
My bad. That's right. Oh, stop. Well, I found out, remember I showed you the two settings? For the distance? Set it, the first one on hand. The second one, that's what Jill did. The middle one. No, the distance is the last one you have in the middle. And the first one, it has she showed me this is the settings that I she has the same lens, so I can't. That's one thing about getting
The library is now closed. The library is now closed.
All my stuff is all from you.
Don't drive up beside you. All right. Safe home.
Good job.
No, I just want to find out if you're bad or you're opening up my big mouth. None of your business.
I want everyone to see it.
Get sandwich.
Yes, it's gonna be archived now.
You really going to do that?
Oh my God, that's not over now.
Huh? He told me.
Does it actually?
I gotta get up in a couple of I've had it.
Okay, we are trying to tell when how fast we do this.
The only stuff it is when it's cloudy and yucky.
I'm so glad. Last weekend I was up and I got out to New York. I'm so glad. Sorry. I'm so glad to get it while around.
That's my job. Oh, for me, it's 5 minutes away. I guess you like man.
I'm just being honest. This is not true. This is all of us.
I don't want to duplicate. I'm just talking to
You're not bad.
Oh, the jellyfish is in it.
It's also a regular dog. Well, you are. No, not yet.
Recently, I spent 4 weeks on the phone.
What are you doing?
I'm ready for you. Say it. Just do it. I mean, I'm not going to be.
Someone has to be representative to the council.
Rob, the other suggestion is the Greater Huntington Council, if you, if our group had a rep,